Montana Territory. Spring of 1879, the wind carried the last of winter's bite when Holden Hayes buried his wife beneath the cottonwood tree behind the house. The earth had been hard, the boys too small to help, and he had dug the grave alone while his 6-year-old son Seth clutched the baby, swaddled and wailing. That was 6 months ago. Since then, Holden's ranch had run lean. The cattle were restless, the boys thinner than they should be, and his own hands shook more often than he liked. He needed help. Which was why, on the first mild morning of April, he rode into the town of Red Willow and pinned a notice to the board outside the mercantile. Cook needed. Room provided. 2 children. Fair pay. Ask for H. Hayes. He did not expect the answer to come so soon or to come from a woman like her. Her name was Mae Trenton. She stepped off the stagecoach 3 days later, boots dusty and face flushed from the ride. She was 23 by her own telling, with dark brown hair pinned back in a neat twist and eyes that looked like they had seen worse than cold Montana mornings. Her dress was plain, her voice steady. "I can cook," she said, "and clean. I have worked for families before." Holden had stared at her, arms crossed, boots planted in the dirt outside the station. He had not expected someone so young, or so calm. "You any good with children?" "I raised my brothers," Mae said. "My mother died when I was 15. He had not hired her right then. But when Seth came running out of the mercantile and stopped short in front of her, wide-eyed and silent, and Mae knelt and said, "You must be Seth." Like she had known him forever, Holden found himself nodding. "Wagons tied out back," he said. "We ride before the sun drops." Mae said goodbye to no one. She climbed into the wagon without a word, settled beside the baby Sarah and held her like she had always belonged there. That was the beginning. The ranch was a 2-hour ride from town. No neighbors for miles. The house was worn but solid, 2 rooms, 1 stove, and a lean-to out back where she could sleep. Mae took to the kitchen like she had lived there years. By the second day, the boys were eating buttered biscuits and stew with meat that was not burnt. By the third, the blankets were washed and the floor swept. Holden found himself watching her more than he should, the way her sleeves rolled up to the elbow, the way her mouth twitched when Seth asked too many questions, the way she sang softly when she thought no one was listening. He was not ready for what came next. It was a quiet morning. The sun had barely come up. Mae was on her knees by the stove, coaxing the fire, hair falling loose from its twist. Sarah toddled over in her bare feet, rubbing her eyes with one fist, and reached out. "Mama," she said. The word was soft, simple, like it belonged. Holden froze in the doorway. Mae turned slowly. Her mouth parted, but no sound came. She glanced at him, then back at the baby, who was now clutching her skirts. Holden's heart slammed against his ribs. 1,000 thoughts tangled in his head, but none made it to his mouth. Mae began, then stopped. He took a step back, then another, turned, walked out into the yard, and did not stop until he reached the fence. He stood there for a long time, the cold wind rising off the hills. He had not said her name, his wife's name, in 6 months. And now his daughter had called another woman Mama. Even worse, he had not hated hearing it. Mae did not bring it up again. She did not apologize. She just kept working, cooking, cleaning, holding Sarah close when she cried and brushing Seth's hair when it got too long. It unsettled him. The ease of it, the way she fit. That night, after the children were asleep, Holden sat on the porch, coat pulled around his shoulders, and Mae stepped out beside him. She held 2 tin mugs of coffee. He took one, nodded his thanks. She sat near, not too close. "I did not tell her to say it," she said softly. "I would never. I know." Silence stretched between them, full of things neither could say. "She misses her mother," Mae said. "So do I." Mae looked down into her coffee. "I am not trying to take her place. I know. He looked at her, then really looked. She was not his wife. She was not trying to be. But she was something solid. Something warm. And he had not realized until this moment how cold he had been. Mae, he said, her name rough in his throat. She turned. But he said nothing more. Not yet. That night, he lay awake long after the fire went out, listening to the wind and the soft creak of the house settling. Somewhere down the hall, Mae hummed a lullaby. Sarah's small laugh floated through the wood. Holden closed his eyes. For the first time since the funeral, he let himself hope. By late May, the snow had melted from the north pasture, and the creek behind the barn ran fast with runoff. The cattle stretched their legs along the hills, ribs showing less with each passing week. Holden rose before dawn each day, same as always, but now there was coffee already waiting by the time he came in from the barn. Mae had taken to early hours like a hawk to high wind. She moved quiet, never wasting step or word, and never asked for more than was given. One morning, as Holden rubbed the dirt from his hands at the pump, he caught her out near the clothesline, her sleeves wet to the elbow, Sarah strapped to her hip with a worn strip of muslin. The baby was laughing at something invisible on the breeze. Mae didn't laugh back, but her mouth softened in a way that settled something deep in Holden's chest. Later that day, he found her in the garden plot behind the house, kneeling in the black soil with her skirt tucked under. She was planting onions, her hands dark with dirt. "You know much about growing in this ground?" he asked. She didn't stop her work. "Not yet, but I figure everything learns the land eventually." Holden nodded and crouched beside her. "Soil here dries quick. Got to water early, before the sun takes it." She didn't look up. "I figured as much." He reached for the seed bag without thinking, brushing her wrist as he did. Her hand went still. The touch was brief, nothing more than skin and dirt, but it pulled his breath sideways. Neither of them said anything. A breeze passed low across the hills, carrying the scent of fresh, turned earth. Somewhere close, a meadowlark sang. Holden straightened and dusted off his trousers. "I'll fetch the bucket." Mae didn't reply, but when he returned, she was already at the pump. That evening, while Mae pulled biscuits from the oven and Sarah napped on a quilt by the stove, Holden sat beside Seth at the table, helping him form his letters. The boy gripped the stub of pencil in his left hand, tongue poking out the corner of his mouth. "Like this?" Seth asked, holding up the paper. Holden squinted at the shaky scrawl. "That's close to a G." Mae glanced over from the hearth. "He's got a steady hand for 6. Seth lit up. "See? Told you I'm good at it." Holden raised an eyebrow at Mae. "You offering to take over lessons?" "If you like," she said, setting a plate of beans and bacon beside him. "I taught the little ones back home, kept them quiet with stories when I could." Holden looked down at the food, then back at her. "You ever think about staying anywhere long?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took her own seat, folding her hands in her lap. "I used to, but plans don't always hold." Seth leaned against Holden's arm. "You could stay here." Mae smiled at the boy, a slow stretch of her mouth that held something tender behind it. "That's not up to me." Holden's throat tightened. He took a sip from his cup and didn't speak again until long after Seth had gone to bed. When the dishes were stacked and the fire banked low, Mae lingered by the doorway, her shawl drawn close. "There's a calm here," she said. Holden, still at the table, looked up. "It's not much." She met his eyes. "Sometimes not much is enough." He rose, crossing the room with a slow step. The lamp between them cast tall shadows on the wall. She didn't move when he stopped in front of her, only tilted her chin slightly upward. "I don't know what this is," he said quietly, "but it's steadier than I expected." Mae's fingers curled into her shawl. I'm not looking to be saved. I wouldn't know how. They stood in silence, close now, the air between them warm from the stove and something else neither of them had named. Then Sarah stirred in the next room, a soft cry breaking the stillness. Mae turned, her hand brushing his coat as she passed. Holden watched her go, the shape of her vanishing into the dark like a promise not yet spoken. Outside, the moon rose over the hills, silver and full. The first proper rain came in early June, heavy enough to turn the yard to mud and send a trickle down the seam of the windowsill in the boys' room. Mae packed wool blankets into the gap, sleeves dark with water, while Holden nailed a piece of tin over the warped frame the next morning. Seth stood at the doorway, holding a lantern with both hands, quiet and steady. That night, the rain drummed low on the roof while Mae stitched patches into one of Holden's shirts by the hearth. He sat across from her, rubbing linseed oil into the handle of a bridle. The fire snapped behind them, soft and even. "You ever ride much?" he asked without raising his eyes. Mae threaded the needle through a frayed cuff. "Some. My uncle had a mule I used for errands. She was stubborn and half-blind, but she got me where I needed to go." Holden's thumb paused over the leather. "I've seen the way you walk out to the barn. You step careful, but you're not afraid. I learned to keep my eyes open. Doesn't mean I don't feel it." Holden leaned back in his chair, studying her in the low firelight. "Folks out here tend to hide what they feel. I've noticed." He waited a moment. "You got anyone wondering where you've gone?" "No," she said without hesitation. "What I had behind me didn't hold." He nodded once, then stood and hung the bridle on the wall peg. Later, when they put the children to bed, Mae lingered by the cradle. Sarah had a fever that day, nothing dangerous, but her cheeks had flushed and she'd refused supper. Now she was cooler, curled on her side, one fist against her mouth. Mae brushed a damp curl from the baby's brow. Holden watched from the doorway. "She settled better when I held her," Mae said, barely above a whisper. "You've got away," he said. She didn't turn. "It's not away. It's just paying attention." Holden stepped inside the room, careful not to creak the plank underfoot. "That's more than most." Mae straightened, folding her hands. "It's not the same as being hers." "She doesn't know the difference," he said. Mae faced him, her expression unreadable in the half-dark. "But you do." Holden lowered his gaze. I do. But it doesn't feel wrong." Mae stepped past him into the hall. Her voice came low, almost to herself. "It's not wrong to want something to stay." The silence that followed was long and plain. The next morning, the sky cleared. The air held a clean, sharp scent, like sage crushed underfoot. Holden saddled the mare for the trip north to check the fence line where the flash flood had swept through. Before mounting, he turned to where Mae stood at the steps, Sarah balanced on her hip. "Could use another set of hands to hold the line while I reset the post." Mae glanced at the baby, then back at him. "Seth can mind her. He's careful." Holden nodded once. They rode out just after midday, the ground still soft under the hooves. Mae kept pace beside him, her posture easy, her gaze moving over the hills like she was memorizing them. At the washout, the fence had collapsed in a tangle of wire and broken timbers. Holden tossed his gloves onto a dry patch and set to pulling the wire free. Mae held the rails steady as he hammered them in. Sweat darkened the back of his shirt, and his breathing came hard by the fourth post. He paused, resting his arms on the top rail. "You always this stubborn about doing things alone?" she asked, brushing a curl from her brow with the back of her wrist. Holden glanced over at her. "Comes from not expecting folks to stay." She didn't look away. "Maybe you ought to let someone surprise you." He didn't answer, but the way he held her eyes said enough. By the time they rode back, dusk had turned the hills blue. The house stood warm in the distance, with lamplight at the window and Seth's shadow moving behind it. They dismounted in silence. Mae handed off the reins, her fingers brushing his again, this time with intention. Inside, Seth was reading to Sarah, his voice slow and proud. Mae stepped in to gather her, lifting the child to her hip without breaking stride. Holden watched them from the doorway, his boots still dusty. When Mae turned and caught his eye, he didn't look away. "We're back," she said. He nodded. "I see that." She hesitated, then asked, "You hungry?" He stepped forward, just enough for his voice to carry low. "I'm tired of eating alone." Mae held his gaze for a beat longer. "Then don't." That night, they sat at the same table, closer than before. No words were rushed, no glances stolen. Just two people sharing the same space, the same fire, and beginning to understand what it might mean to stay. By mid-June, the hills had turned a deep green, and the air carried the scent of pine warmed by sun. The calves had taken to the upper pasture, and the days stretched long enough to finish chores without lanterns. Mae had started drying herbs on the porch rail, wild mint, yarrow, a bit of horehound she'd found near the creek, and the scent of it drifted through the open windows. One afternoon, while Holden was mending a harness out by the barn, Mae came out to him with a strip of linen wrapped around her palm. "Wire caught me," she said, holding it up. He set the leather aside and reached for her hand. "Let me see." The cut wasn't deep, but it ran clean across the heel of her thumb. He held her hand steady, his touch careful, and reached for the bucket beside the post. "You should rinse it," he said, dipping a ladle and pouring water over the wound. "I did. Mostly." He glanced at her, then back to her hand. "Needs more than mostly." She let him work, quiet as he wrapped it with a strip from the clean cloth he kept in the saddle shed. Her skin was sun-warmed and dry beneath his fingers, and when he tied off the knot, she didn't pull away. "You always this particular?" she asked, her voice low, more curious than teasing. "Only when it matters." Mae looked at him then, not smiling, not softening, just looking like she was weighing what kind of man he was underneath the quiet. That night, with the children asleep and the wind settling low in the grass, Mae brought her sewing out to the porch. Holden joined her with a tin cup of water, setting it beside her without a word. The stillness between them was easy now, not empty. The kind of quiet that fills up slowly with things that don't need saying. Mae threaded her needle, holding it up where the porch light caught. "You ever think about what comes next?" Holden leaned back against the post, arms crossed. "Can't say I do. Not much room for guessing in work like this." "I don't mean guessing. I mean choosing." He didn't answer right away. The sound of frogs rose from the creek, steady and low. "I stopped choosing when my wife died," he said finally. "Just kept putting one foot down." Mae stitched in silence for a while, her movements smooth and practiced. "You're not standing still anymore." Holden looked at her, the way her jaw set when she focused, the way she didn't flinch from hard truths. "I don't know what I'm walking toward." "Does it have to be a long road?" she asked. He studied her face. "You waiting on me to say something plain?" "I'm not waiting," she said. Needle paused above the cloth. "I'm here." "That's different." He stepped down from the porch and turned to face her. The porch light caught the streaks of dust on his shirt, the faint line of sweat at his collar. She set her sewing aside and stood. "You're not just the woman who came to cook," he said. Mae's breath caught, but she didn't move. "You're part of this place now. You made it so." She stepped forward, close enough that he could see the thread still looped in her fingers. "I've been waiting for a place to feel like it could hold me." Holden reached for her hand, the one he'd wrapped earlier, and brought it to his chest. "You've got one." They stood there as the wind stirred the herbs drying behind them, the scent of mint and soil rising between them. Her head came to rest against his shoulder, and his hand settled at her back, firm and certain. Neither spoke again that night, but when they left the porch and went inside, they did so hand in hand, without hesitation. The summer deepened, slow and unhurried. Heat settled over the hills like a blanket left too long in the sun, and the dirt road leading from Red Willow to the Hayes Ranch baked hard beneath the hooves of passing stock. The days stretched longer, the evenings softer. Mae's room remained hers at her choosing, but she spent fewer nights behind her own door. Some evenings she fell asleep with Sarah curled against her chest in the rocker, the fire down to coals, Holden stretched out beside them on the floor with one hand resting on the baby's foot. Other nights, she and Holden sat on the porch through to darkness, speaking little but resting easy in the hush. One afternoon, while Holden repaired a broken beam in the lean-to, Mae came out carrying a small parcel wrapped in muslin. The wind tugged at her skirts, and the dust caught in her lashes. "I found this in the back of the cupboard," she said, offering it to him. He wiped his hands on his trousers, took the bundle and opened it carefully. Inside lay a cracked photograph, faded near the edges but still clear enough to see the boyish face and the woman beside him. Her hair pinned in a loose coil, her arm looped through his. "I thought it might be yours," Mae said. Holden touched the edge of the image, thumb brushing the crease. "It was taken the week we came out from Kansas. Before we knew how hard it'd be." Mae waited, not pressing. "I used to look at this and think we were too young to know what we were building," he said. "Now I think we were brave not to care." Mae glanced down at the photo, then back to him. "You carried it this whole time. I didn't know it was still here." She didn't speak again until he folded the cloth closed and handed it back. "You want me to keep it put away?" "No," he said. "Leave it on the shelf. She belongs here too." Mae gave a small nod and turned toward the house, her steps measured. Holden watched her go, the weight in his chest shifting into something that felt lighter than it had in years. That night, after Sarah had fallen asleep with her hand curled around Mae's braid and Seth snored softly from the bedroll by the hearth, Holden pulled 2 chairs close to the open window. The air was cool, just enough to lift the edge of Mae's sleeve as she sat. He poured water from the pitcher, passed her a cup, and waited. "Do you ever think about marrying again?" she asked, not looking at him. "I didn't," he said. "Not until you." Mae turned, her face unreadable in the dark. "You're sure?" "I'm not guessing," he said. "I've watched you with the children, watched you with this land. You don't just fit here. You make it better." She didn't speak for a long while. A cricket chirped beneath the step. "I've spent a long time being useful," Mae said. "But I'd like to be wanted too." Holden reached for her hand, rough palm over hers. "I don't want a cook, or a nurse, or a helper with the garden. I want you." Her breath left her slow. "Then you have me." They married in late July, beneath the same cottonwood that shaded the grave. Holden carved a bench from pine for the occasion, and Mae wore a dress dyed soft blue with butternut husks and indigo she'd bartered for in town. Seth stood beside them, proud and solemn in his mended boots, while Sarah clapped her hands and chewed on the hem of Mae's skirt. Reverend Callis from Red Willow made the trip out on his own horse, his wife sending along a jar of preserved peaches as a gift. The ceremony was short, the vows simple. When it came time to kiss, Holden didn't hesitate. He held Mae's face between his hands, and she leaned into him like she'd found home. Afterward, they shared bread and salt, and Mae passed slices of pie from the tin she'd hidden in the cellar that morning. The sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long shadows, and the sky burned gold. That night, Mae carried Sarah to bed while Holden tucked Seth in. They met in the doorway, their movements quiet, practiced. "Everything feels the same," she whispered. Holden pulled her close. Except now it's ours. They stepped into their room together, no longer hers, no longer his. Years passed. The ranch grew. Holden built a second barn before Seth turned 11, and Mae taught him letters and accounts at the kitchen table each morning. Sarah learned to ride on the same mare Mae once used to fetch water, bareback and barefoot by the time she was 8. Mae kept her herbs in the cupboard now, along with a row of salves and tinctures she made herself. Women from nearby homesteads began riding out for her help. Some brought gifts, eggs, cut cloth, a bolt of cotton when they had it. Mae never took more than what was offered. Holden grew silver at the temples and slower at the fence line, but his eyes never strayed from Mae. Not when she bent to kiss Sarah's scraped knee. Not when she laughed after Seth caught his first calf. Not when she slid into bed beside him each night, warm and whole. They never needed grand words. Only steady hands, open doors, and the quiet promise each day brought. When the first snow came one October, light and clean, Mae stood at the window with her palm pressed to the glass. Holden came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "Still feels like you chose me yesterday," he said. Mae leaned back against his chest. "I choose you again. Every time." They watched the snow fall in silence, the house behind them full of warmth, the land outside resting easy under sky. Everything they had built was still standing. Everything they had lost had found place beside what they'd kept. And everything ahead was theirs to walk, together.